All right, so this is the image that we're going off of. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. And one of the things that I think is cool about this photo is we've got sort of framing elements. We can see part of the dashboard of the car and part of the upper part. And then in the photo itself, the subject matter, we can see a really strong perspective. So that's something I'll want to be making a note of when I'm making my painting. Even the tree line, all these trees are about the same height and they're kind of following the perspective lines as well, with the trees that are over by the side of the road. So I'm going to take what I see in this photo and I'm going to go ahead and start working on my sketch. And I'm just going to do it straight on the watercolor paper. You guys probably already have a sketch that you're using. So with my paper right here, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a horizontal horizon line. And if I'm looking at the photo, the horizon line is probably a little bit closer to the bottom of the picture plane. It's not perfectly right in the middle. It's probably about right here. So I'm going to take my paper, take my ruler, make that horizon line. And then our perspective vanishing point is a little bit over to the left here. And the width of the road actually goes out of the frame over on the side there, and then down here. I'm going to draw my perspective first, and then I can add the details of the car. All right, I think the road's actually a little wider. It's sort of more like over here. Do we like that? Does that look accurate-ish? Even if it's not the same, that's okay. All right, so over on the side, we have some trees. I'm going to create another line towards the vanishing point that'll give me some clue about how tall to do the trees. So maybe I would have a tree which is sort of right here and is about this tall. And I like to make my trees really irregular shaped. Making them irregular can actually make it look more realistic when we start to paint. And there's sort of a lot of trees sort of going down this way towards the vanishing point. And you'll notice they follow that shape because we have a perspective drawing here for this kind of landscape. If I have a little area I want to erase, using the kneaded eraser works super nicely to erase because it can erase and erase gently by lightening the lines. That way, if I just wanted to lighten my perspective line but still be able to see the tops of the trees, I could do that. If I wanted to lighten my lines for the edge of the road here, I can just tap to do that. If I wanted to lighten the horizon line, same deal, I can just tap. So that way I can still see when I'm painting, but it's not going to show through my paint once I begin to add it. There's a lot of trees over on this side of the picture too. Since they're all sort of the same distance from the car, since it's a flat line parallel to the horizon, I'm gonna just make this sort of smaller tree line that's a little further here in the distance. Maybe if one tree right here, one tree right here. Again, we're going for rough impressions, not perfection. There's a bit of a tarmac gray zone right here. There are some lines in the road. I'm not going to really try to create those perfectly because, again, they're really small compared to the rest of the picture. I might add like one single line just to give me an indication that there's a little car here. I'm not going to draw it. There's a little building back here. I'm not going to draw it either because it's really small. I am going to draw the top of our car frame. And there's sort of like a handle here, like a grab bar that we can see. That's in the very foreground. Also down here on the dashboard, we can see all the way across. All right, and then we have a lot of clouds in the sky that are also kind of in this nice sort of angular shape. I'm not going to try to really draw them in perfectly. I'm sort of going to freehand paint them a little later on. So I think that's fine for a sketch. It's pretty loose. Maybe I'll lighten up this line a little bit just so I can recreate it later with my paint. I think it's always good to start with large areas of wash. So I'm going to focus on adding some paint overall to my painting, starting with some of the larger areas. In the sky, we can see a lot of orange and a lot of purple. So maybe I want to do some wet and wet so that the colors can have room to mix. And I'm even applying the wet area sort of over the trees because the sky, importantly, goes behind the trees. Okay, so it's not fully saturated wet yet, but it's a good start. And maybe I'm gonna mix a nice vibrant orange for the clouds. Oopsie. Orange and yellow. Maybe even a tiny bit of red. You should probably wash your brush in between colors and not mix up your paints like I just did. And I think that's kind of a nice color. I can always test it on a scratch paper, like a printer paper. And I think that's really similar to the colors of the clouds that we see. So maybe I'm gonna go in and dab some of that color in, similar to how I see the shapes of the clouds. If I think it should be more yellow, one of the options, if I need to clean it out, I can use water and wash and pick up the paint to clean it out. But if I see maybe I want this to be a little more yellow, I can even dab paint directly onto the surface. If it's too dark of a color, you can use something like a towel, and I like to find a point so I can control it, and I could lift up some of the color. So if I got too much of a color and I just want it to be a little lighter, I can use that lifting technique. And now it's more subtle. Maybe I don't want the purple to make brown when it mixes, so I'm gonna wait for another layer to add purple. While I'm waiting for the sky to dry, I could go in and begin to add some green for a grassy area. Instead of using green straight out of the palette, which is kind of a really boring and cliche color green, I'm gonna take the green in the lid and mix it with a little bit of brown. And it's sort of a more gray, neutral green. And right now this is still quite dark. I like to add my first layer as a more gentle kind of wash. So I'm still not sure this is the perfect color, but the convenient thing is because it's got so much water in it, it'll be really easy to layer another color over it later if I wanted to change it. And then we're going to continue this on the side of the bushes here. All right, if I wanted to mix up a nice gray for the road, I like to mix brown and blue to get a warm neutral gray as opposed to just using the black. It looks more natural. I could even use a graded wash to pull the color towards the vanishing point to represent how sometimes things get lighter in color as they get further away. So maybe I'll go in with my color and apply it darker close to the front here. And then I'll wash my brush and I'll use just a little bit of water to fill in the rest of the road. And I want to distinguish the gray on the road from the gray that's going to be in the car deck. So I'll think about how I can do that and mix a different shade of gray. Maybe I'm going to initially add a little gray wash for this that I see up here with my car handle. And it can be really light right now. It's always better to start light and then add a darker layer later than to start too dark and not be able to lift away the paint once it's dried. In the plastic of the car, it almost is even reflecting some of the sunset colors on the dashboard here. There is one part of the dashboard that's sort of darker though, so maybe I'll start to indicate that with a shadow. So I'm just looking constantly back and forth between my painting and the reference photo and thinking about how I can represent what I want to represent. And it doesn't have to be perfectly realistic. This today is really a lot about experimenting and taking chances and trying different things. Maybe I'm going to use this yellow-green to represent the trees. And maybe instead of painting the trees in solidly, I'm going to use my brush and kind of tap the paint to represent the texture. And if I do this multiple times, it will fill in the trees, but instead of looking flat, they'll look like they have different parts that kind of weave in and out, more like real branches. I'm trying to mix a little orange and green here to get a brown color to go in and fill in this area that's sort of woody but undefined. There's like a house back there, but I'm not going to draw it because it's, again, really small. So it's a lot about trial and error and experimentation. All right, as I think about the rest of the sky, one of the things I know is that it's hard to make a very natural looking transition between orange and blue because they're further apart on the color wheel. In fact, they are complementing colors. They're perfectly opposite each other on the color wheel. So what I'm going to do in the sky is I'm going to really emphasize the colors that are in the transition between them. So like red and purple. So I'm going to get some red and bring some red into our sunset. Even if you have like a red orange, this is kind of a nice color. Since I'm still working in relatively large areas, I'm using a larger paintbrush. I find it easier to work with when I'm painting on large areas. Good morning. If you just got here, you can send me a message. I see one message in the chat. Thank you for letting me know. So it's a little loose and sketchy right now. That's okay. I can always go back and add more layers and or blend layers together later. Yeah. Eric, how is it going for you? What's your status on the watercolor painting? If your paint palette gets too full of color, you can always use some water and a towel or tissue to clean it out. I don't like to do it too often because it can waste paint. I usually just try to incorporate paint into the mix, but I want to mix a really bright color. Okay. Do you know what time she's coming to pick them up? Cool. That'd be great. Thanks. Who's missing? Okay, we still have a couple people who are not here. Kenna, how's this project going for you? Were you able to start your watercolor painting? No, we're not sending out. We're staying in the meeting and working. That way, if you have a question, we can like talk about it, and other people might also have the same questions. Yeah, so we're definitely working. Definitely, you should have your watercolor out and you should be painting, but we're staying in the Zoom meeting at the same time. Good question. So we're starting a different painting today. So for this project, we're creating two paintings. One that we started yesterday on Tuesday, and one that we're starting today. Today we're starting a different painting than the one that we did on Tuesday. And we're gonna end up with a total of two paintings. So we're starting them both this week and we're finishing them both next week. If I want to add more tree detail, I might want to mix some more different greens in the top of my lid. Maybe even a darker, cooler green. So I'm going to start with the green color, but I can make it more interesting by adding some blue or even some brown. I can always test out my colors on a spare piece of paper just to get an idea of what they look like. That's pretty bluish, but I think it might be good for some like shadows in here. So I'm going to sort of begin to add a little bit of depth to these trees in here. And if we're like, whoa, that's really too blue, it's really jumping out at us, you can always use a tissue or some other paper towel. And if you tap on it while it's still wet, it'll pick up just a little bit of the color. Mine is pretty dry, so it's not really picking up very much, but I'm okay with that. I think it's still what I wanted in terms of like creating some shadow. You can also even use dry brush to create texture, as my brush has just a little bit of paint on it and the paint isn't super wet. That could be a nice way to emphasize the fact that it's foliage and it has texture.